John chapter 6 verses 16 through 27. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed up about 3 to 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but that they had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten bread, and after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for the food that spoils, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval." The disciples just witnessed an incredible sign from Jesus. Jesus is at the mountainside healing and teaching. There are 5,000 men plus women plus children present. After a long day, they are hungry. Jesus feeds these people with 5 loaves and 2 fish from a boy. There are 12 baskets full of bread left. What an incredible miracle! However, what does Jesus do? Instead of spending more time with the people and developing his fame, he dismisses the crowd and goes up to the mountain to pray. This is not a political get-together. Jesus also tells his disciples to get into the boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. Then a storm appears. It is getting dark. The wind is blowing. The waves are beating the boat. The waters get rough. What are they going to survive this storm? When they had rowed about 3 to 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Don't be afraid." So the disciples experienced a range of emotions in the past few hours. The highs and the lows that they experience are like the highs and the lows we experience too. They see Jesus feed 5,000. Then it is all quiet when Jesus dismisses the crowd. What is Jesus doing? He makes them get into the boat. Then a storm occurs. They are afraid they are going to lose their lives. They see someone walking on the water. Is this a ghost? These are the highs and the lows of life. According to Matthew and Mark, the disciples think that Jesus is a ghost. While they are struggling to keep their boat above water, a figure walks on the water towards them. They are truly frightened. Jesus assures them that he is not a ghost. "It is I. Don't be afraid." When we usually think of Jesus walking on the water, we think that he walks on the water in a very calm situation. However, Matthew, Mark, and John tell us that it is a storm. It is a storm. And as Jesus walks towards the boat, he looks like a ghost. Jesus wants to help them, but they think that he is a ghost. Perhaps this is what we think of Jesus in our storms. He is walking on the water towards us to help us, but we think he's a ghost. We are terrified. Will we accept help from Jesus? And how does Peter respond to Jesus? "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. This is found in Matthew 14 verses 28 to 29. In the middle of this storm, Peter responds to Jesus' word, "Come." He walks on water towards Jesus. Peter somehow trusts Jesus' call to him in the storm. He gets out of the boat. To his surprise, he walks on water. He walks towards Jesus. Yet the faith of Peter does not last long. Matthew 14 verse 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. So there is a storm. Peter sees and hears Jesus. Peter walks on water toward Jesus. However, he sees the wind. He sees the waves. He sees the rough water. He becomes afraid. He sinks. He is afraid of drowning. He cries out to Jesus, Lord, save me. We are so often like Peter, aren't we? There is a storm. Jesus appears. We walk towards him. But when we see we are walking on water, we doubt. We sink. We nearly drowned. Jim Cantore has been a storm tracker for the Weather Channel for 25 years, which means he chases and runs into the storms and reports on them on the television screen. In USA Today in 2011, Cantore noted whether he is leaning into the ferocious winds of a hurricane or shivering as a blast of polar air drops down from the Arctic, Cantore is often on the scene to help viewers appreciate how weather tests us. In the spring of 2011, Cantore provided coverage in the midst of severe tornado outbreaks in towns in Alabama and in Missouri. Both these towns suffered extensive damage. It was as unthinkable as you would think, Cantore says. Houses were piled up into corners and streets looked more like movie sets. But according to Cantore, these kind of storms pale in comparison with the personal storms of life that some people experience on a daily basis. Cantore gets personal. He thinks of his two children, both of whom are born with a Fragile X syndrome, a genetic disorder that can lead to autism-like symptoms. Cantore says that his children have the real storms of life, and what he calls the storms that hurt the most and never go away. Cantore says, what my children have to deal with on a daily basis is by far more difficult than anything I will ever come in contact with. Lord, save me. This is our cry during the storms we meet in our lives. We walk on the water towards Jesus, but we doubt. Then we nearly drown. Lord, save me. So what kind of storm do you face in your life right now? Matthew 14 verse 31. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? I remember this experience when both my children were about a year old. They were crawling around on the carpet and trying to stand up. They were beginning to get their strength in their legs to stand up. Both would try to stand, but go back on their knees due to the lack of strength. Then what follows will be repeated many times. And this is one of the joys of parenthood. I would reach out my hand to them. They would grab my hand with theirs, and I would extend my hand so that they stood up straight. And I would say to them, see, you are standing now. Good job, Esther. Good job, Luke. And it was not the standing that I helped my children with. Pretty soon they wanted to learn how to walk. They could not walk by themselves. Then again, I would extend my hand to them. They grabbed my hand with theirs. Then we would walk down the room with our hands joined. There is a storm. Jesus appears like a ghost. He says, it is I. Do not be afraid. Peter says, Lord, if it's you, please tell me to come to you. Jesus says, come, Peter. Peter goes out in faith. He walks on water, but he feels the wind. He sees the waves. He doubts. He begins to sink. He cries out to Jesus, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reaches out with his hand and catches Peter. And as Jesus holds his hand, Jesus says to Peter, you of little faith, why did you doubt? I am the one who feeds the 5,000 by the mountainside. I am the one who asks you all to get into the boat. I am the one who walks on water to get to you all. I am the one who tells you, Peter, to come out to me. Don't doubt, Peter. Have faith in me. Here's my hand. Hold my hand. Let's walk together to the boat. I will always walk with you, Peter. And then Matthew 14 verses 32 to 33 tells us what the disciples do after this episode. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, Truly, you are the Son of God. He feeds 5,000 on the mountainside. He walks on water. He helps Peter walk on water. He grabs Peter's hand when he sings. And so the disciples do nothing but fall down in worship before Jesus in the boat. Truly, you are the Son of God. And what do they mean when they say, truly, you are the Son of God? This means that he is more than a ghost. He is God who becomes a human being, ghostly as he looks. He is God who becomes a human being to give us a hand up when we go through the storms of life. Jesus comes to save us. So even though he sometimes looks like a ghost, Jesus walks on the water, and he walks on the water to save us when we go through a storm. So in the storms of life, watch out for the hand of Jesus. Pastor Lee, who lives in Illinois, shares this personal story about how he had to rely on what his town called storm homes. In a small town of Britain, South Dakota, where I grew up, current population of 1,200 people and lots more cattle, it has always been has often been a locus of severe winter weather. During the harshest months, the temperature drops below zero, but historically, the real danger has come from blizzards. The blizzards can develop quickly, causing the country roads to become snowbound and impassable. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, the local school district had a creative way for keeping safe when a blizzard hit on a school day. On a normal day, the school students would take one of the 8 school buses directly to their house. But occasionally, a blizzard would descend during the school day, and it wasn't safe to bus the kids home. So the school devised a system where every farm kid had a family in town who would be prepared to take them in. Their parents would know that they were fed and safe in their neighbor's house. A couple of years ago, I was visiting Britain and the rural church where I grew up. And one of my former neighbors, Roger Johnson, mentioned to me that our home in town had been his storm home. That's what we called them, storm homes. Our little greenhouse on 7th Street was Roger's refuge when the terrible storm came. And this is what every church is supposed to be, a storm home. By the grace of God, your church should be a safe place, a home that some people have never had. Here we are with Jesus, the Good Shepherd, and incredibly we embody him together when we are here and when we disperse into the harvest fields. So, according to Pastor Lee, the local church can be a storm home for people who are experiencing the storms. But there's something deeper than that. The local church is a storm home for people because Jesus is the storm home of the local church. The local church becomes a storm home because Jesus walks with the people of the local church. When we gather together in Jesus' name, we embody the presence of Jesus in our lives. And on Sunday, we are the church gathered, and on Monday, we are the church scattered. And Jesus walks with us, even if we are the church gathered or the church scattered. And in the storms of life, Jesus walks on water and offers us a hand up. Don't drown. Reach out to him. Jesus is our home in the storm.